Many wrestlers are defined by a single unforgettable rivalry, one that becomes so central to their mythology that it's hard to mention one without the other. These rivalries can be career-defining, shaping how they're remembered long after they've left the ring. Occasionally though, a feud goes even deeper. Once in a while you get to see a rivalry that takes a wrestler to a whole new level, a feud you can see the repercussions of in their style of wrestling nearly 2 decades later, one that fundamentally changes a wrestler forever. In 2005, a young rising star met one of the most iconic and violent figures of the 2000s American independent scene, and began a brutal year-long war that took that young prospect from Canada and set him on the path towards superstardom, and solidified the other as one of the most legendary figures in all of independent professional wrestling. This one's going to get nasty. Kevin Steen versus Super Dragon. Despite competing for 2 of the independent companies best known for hardcore wrestling in the early 2000s, IWS in Canada and CZW in the US, at this point in Kevin Steen's career he has generally avoided hardcore matches. This may come as a surprise to those who watched his work throughout the late 2000s to the present day, since he's now well known for his excellent performance in such matches, particularly in Ring of Honor and Pro Wrestling Guerrilla. His tag team wars against the Briscoes and the Young Bucks, as well as matches against El Generico and Adam Cole come to mind as great examples of Steen's proficiency in weapons-based matches. But this brawling weapons-based style just was not present in Steen's early career. This was the case until December of 2005, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Super Dragon was an incredibly unique figure in the mid-2000s independent wrestling scene, one of the few to have a truly dangerous aura about them. Much like Low-Ki, Samoa Joe and Necro Butcher, Dragon's presence really changed the atmosphere whenever he made his way to the ring, and it genuinely felt dangerous to be near him. Much like Kevin Steen, Super Dragon did not begin his career as the brutal fighter he became. He was initially trained in Lucha Libre, which was, and still is, incredibly popular in California, and he was a very capable high flyer, even competing in a dark match for WCW Thunder, teaming with Blitzkrieg. While he was competing primarily in Revolution Pro Wrestling in the very early 2000s, not to be confused with the British promotion of the same name, his style began to evolve to incorporate more vicious offense. His high-flying roots were still very much alive in his wrestling style, but the core of his moveset was beginning to consist of vicious strikes and submissions, alongside a wide array of devastating drivers he used to finish his opponents. By the time our story begins, Dragon had become one of the top stars of the California independent circuit, had completed a month-long tour of Japan with All Japan Pro Wrestling, founded PWG along with 5 other California-based wrestlers, and begun establishing himself outside of California with appearances for IWA Mid-South, JCW, Jersey All-Pro and CZW. By the end of 2004, Dragon was a well-travelled veteran of the independent scene, and Steen, while having wrestled a lot of matches in Canada, had only appeared half a dozen times in the US, and was very much a rookie. The story begins in December of 2004, but not in PWG, where the rest of this feud takes place, but in CZW, where Steen had made his US debut 3 months earlier in an acclaimed 4-way match with fellow Canadian independent wrestlers Sexy Eddie, XS69 and El Generico. In December of 2004 at Cage of Death 6, CZW's biggest show of the year, Steen and Dragon would face off for the first time in a tag team match, with Dragon teaming with his regular SBS partner Excalibur, and Steen teaming with El Generico. While Steen and Generico would become iconic partners and rivals for the best part of 2 decades, this would be the first time they would actually wrestle as a tag team. Before the match even starts, there is palpable tension between Steen and Dragon, with Dragon looking to try to bully Steen, and Steen absolutely refusing to back down. The match itself is a lot of fun, with the experienced tag team of Excalibur and Dragon working over Generico for much of the early part of the match. It also features one of my absolute favourite spots of all time, with Dragon knocking Steen off the apron and taking his place, tricking Generico into making the hot tag to Dragon. It's such a great spot and I'm still surprised no one has adopted it for their own in recent years. I think the crowds of today would really like it. Eventually Generico is able to mount a comeback and Steen and Dragon are finally able to meet in the ring, forehead to forehead, with neither man backing down from the other, before beginning to trade vicious, hateful forearms. Steen is able to get the better of Dragon, and in a great bit of foreshadowing of what's to come, hits Dragon with his own signature curb stomp. The four trade massive moves back and forth until Dragon is able to connect with the Psycho Driver on Generico to get the victory. I really like this match. Generico sells the offense of the PWG contingent really well, and there is the palpable feeling of hatred between the two teams. Steen and Dragon immediately have great chemistry, and the finishing stretch is really solid. Not a perfect match by any means, but a really fun action-packed tag that is very interesting to look back on, considering where those guys ended up. Post-match, Steen turns on Generico, hitting him with his signature package pile driver before Dragon and Excalibur make the save. It doesn't last long though, as Excalibur nails the Tiger Driver 98 on Generico, and Dragon follows up with a brutal double stomp to Generico's head, wedged in a steel chair. A week later, at PWG's Uncanny Xmas event, Super Dragon would defeat Johnny Storm to retain the PWG title, the title he won a month earlier when he defeated Frankie Kazarian. After the match, a Super Dragon imposter attacked Super Dragon, hitting him with a brutal lariat and Super Dragon's own Psycho Driver number 2. 2 months later at PWG's All Nude review, after retaining the title by countout against Samoa Joe, the Red Super Dragon attacked once again, this time hitting a curb stomp before being chased off by Super Dragon's SBS stablemate Disco Machine. At the start of the next show, the imposter Super Dragon will strike again, this time attacking Excalibur before being chased off by Disco Machine and Super Dragon. And Kevin Steen would get a massive win in a 4-way match for the number 1 contendership for Super Dragon's PWG title, pinning Generico in a match also involving Christopher Daniels and AJ Styles, and would go on to challenge Dragon in the main event of the show. Steen would jump Dragon during his entrance and beat him down on the outside. Eventually Super Dragon is able to get the upper hand in the ring, unsurprising since Steen had already wrestled less than half an hour earlier, and would begin grinding him down with some nasty strikes and submissions. A big mistake from Dragon would turn the match around in Steen's favour, as Steen is able to avoid Dragon's signature tope con hero, and Dragon takes a nasty spill into the chairs. Steen is just about able to connect with a dive of his own, before locking in Dragon's own trademark leg full Nelson. Steen continues to soften up Dragon's head and neck for the package pile driver. Dragon begins to mount a comeback, this time connecting with the dive and following up with a curb stomp, the second attempt being counted into a roll-up by Steen for a 2 count. Steen's attempt at the package pile driver would be counted into a second curb stomp for a very close 2 count. Steen is able to avoid the diving double foot stomp to the back of the head, and almost puts Dragon away with a perfect moonsault. The two trade brutal lariats before Steen is able to connect with Dragon's own curb stomp and the package pile driver for an incredibly close 2 count. Dragon rolls to the outside to try and recover, but gets dragged back in by Steen. He attempts Dragon's own Psycho Driver, but Super Dragon is able to escape and nails Steen with his own package pile driver to get the win and retain the title in a great match. This is a really solid match for their first singles meeting. Steen wrestling with incredible urgency, knowing the disadvantage he was at after having already wrestled earlier on in the show, and the two becoming more familiar with each other after their tag match in CZW. Steen being able to avoid much of Dragon's offense, but Dragon getting the win using Steen's own package pile driver. Not an amazing match by any stretch, but one that showed glimpses of what could be a really special rematch in the future, with Dragon's aggression forcing Steen to step up and match it, ultimately falling short but showing signs of being able to rival Super Dragon in viciousness and brutality, something very few had done before, especially someone as young and inexperienced as Steen. The fact that Dragon was such a dominant and overpowering wrestler also helped make his opponents look great. It might seem hard to believe for those who haven't watched much of Super Dragon, particularly in PWG, but he had as much of an aura around him as any wrestler in their prime that I can think of. Surviving him when he was wrestling so brutally, win or lose, gave wrestlers so much credibility. Him being so unrelenting on offense meant that when he would sell for you, it meant so much more. On the first night of the 2005 All-Star Weekend, Steen and Dragon would clash for the PWG title once again, this time in a 3-way match also involving El Generico. This match starts with Steen and Dragon facing off once again, and the two of them trying to keep Generico out of the match as much as possible, throwing him to the outside whenever they can to try and make it a singles match between the two of them, with the elbows that Steen and Dragon throw at each other being as nasty as you'd expect. All 3 men in this match had wrestled the others in a singles match at least once, so all the pairings have some established chemistry. And while the story going into this match based on the previous show is Steen pursuing Dragon's title, every segment of the match where one individual sits out is very entertaining. I particularly love the brutal ways Dragon breaks up pinfalls in this match. Where many wrestlers would opt for the classic double axe handle to the pinning opponent, Super Dragon insists on stomps and kicks to the back of the head. It's touches like that that really set Super Dragon apart from most other wrestlers, maximising moments by using the sickest offense available at any given time. Generico is the punching bag for both men for the majority of the match, though towards the end he's able to use his high-flying style to get the better of both of them, as well as nailing Super Dragon with the turnbuckle brainbuster, one of my absolute favourite super finishers. Dragon would pick up the victory after taking out Steen on the outside and hitting Generico with a double foot stomp to the back of the head, a monstrous lariat, and finally the Psycho Driver. I've never been a massive fan of three-way matches, particularly modern ones that constantly have an odd man out waiting by the apron, as I feel that unless you're going to actually use the fact you have an extra wrestler in play to tell more complex and layered in-ring stories, the match is almost always better with just two participants. That said, this match is solid. The action is fast-paced, and the previous encounters between the three allow for some great spots where each man's signature moves are countered. What has to be said though, and this goes for most of the matches I'm going to be talking about in this video, is that the commentary leaves a lot to be desired. While I do think that Excalibur is one of the best commentators in the business today, and has been for the best part of a decade, the commentary for these matches is generally unfocused and honestly hurts my enjoyment for a lot of them, which is a shame, as in-ring there's a lot to enjoy in PWG around this time. The next night, Super Dragon would lose the title to AJ Styles in a really solid match, worth seeking out especially if you haven't seen much of AJ's early career on the independents before he really began to make a name for himself in TNA, after the Unbreakable Triple Threat match a bit later that year. At the next show, having lost the title, the always silent Super Dragon would make a challenge to the Imposter for a guerrilla warfare match, with his tag partner Excalibur acting as his mouthpiece. Excalibur would go to leave, before attacking him from behind, revealing himself as the mastermind behind the attacks. He explained he was tired of Dragon holding the spotlight in PWG, and announced that while he wasn't the imposter, he would be taking the imposter's place in this match. What follows is an incredibly violent match that I highly recommend you seek out and watch for yourself, especially if you haven't seen much of Excalibur as a wrestler. Excalibur has control of Dragon until the fight makes its way to the outside, where Dragon hits a backflip off the wall to wipe out Excalibur and himself. When the fight returns to the ring, Dragon punishes Excalibur, wedging his head and neck in a ladder before double stomping it across Excalibur's throat, following up with a horrific curb stomp and a chair shot, but Excalibur somehow kicks out. The story of this match is that while Excalibur is able to inflict a lot of damage, the nature of the guerrilla warfare match favours the more aggressive and dangerous Super Dragon, who is able to keep responding to whatever Excalibur throws at him with more violence than Excalibur is capable of. A tope and a tombstone onto a steel chair is not enough for Excalibur to get the win. Dragon takes back control of the diving senton and the violence party, and tries for a powerbomb into the ladder set up in the corner, but Excalibur is able to reverse it and drive Dragon through it with a water wheel slam. The diving headbutt is countered with a chair to the face, but Dragon's chimeraplex is not enough to get the win. He tries for the moonsault double stomp but gets shut down by a spider German suplex, followed by a chair assisted diving knee drop. The Tiger Driver 98 is countered into Dragon's Psycho Driver 2, but it's only for a 2 count. Dragon wedges Excalibur's head in a chair and tries for the double stomp, but Excalibur is able to escape at the last second. It doesn't end well for Excalibur though, as Dragon ducks the thrown chair and hits a nasty lariat, followed up by another one and a murderous chair shot to the back of Excalibur's head. He manages to hit the double stomp he tried moments earlier, before the imposter Super Dragon intervenes. He takes off his mask, revealing himself to be Kevin Steen, before hitting the package pile driver and helping Excalibur hit a Tiger Driver 98 through a table and defeat his former partner. This without question is one of my absolute favourite matches. There are some sloppy moments, and the ending clearly doesn't go exactly to plan, but I don't think any of that really matters. It's such an unbelievably brutal match, and these guys hold absolutely nothing back. The chair shots to the head are disgusting, all the ladder work is gross, just a non-stop nasty violent spot fest, and I love it. The chair duck into the lariat is an awesome spot, and it's executed perfectly here, and the reveal of Steen as the imposter Super Dragon gets a big reaction from the crowd. Fellow SBS member Disco Machine makes a save for Dragon, but the damage is already done. After the show, Steen and Excalibur cut a promo explaining their actions. Excalibur talks about how Dragon let the spotlight go to his head, and how he saw potential in the young Kevin Steen. Steen says that when he came to PWG, his goal was to become Super Dragon, to take his spot in PWG and in wrestling as a whole. a challenge is made for a tag match for the next show, with Disco and Dragon set to take on Steen and Excalibur, and Excalibur tells Disco that the offer is on the table for him to join them. Disco Machine is the odd man out in this match, as the weakest in-ring wrestler of the four, which is the entire story of the match. It doesn't take long for Steen and Excalibur to take control, working over Disco Machine with some very effective tag team strategy, while also taking advantage of the anger issues of Super Dragon. Steen and Excalibur repeatedly antagonise Dragon on the apron, taunting him into making his way into the ring, which attracts the attention of referee Rick Knox and allows the new SBS to continue using the dirty tactics on Disco. Disco Machine is definitely a limited wrestler, but in this role, as the underdog punching bag for the heels, he's incredibly effective. His selling really puts over the cruelty of Steen and Excalibur, and he manages to really get the crowd behind him. His moments of babyface fire are few and far between and very brief, and Super Dragon has to repeatedly break up pins to keep his team alive, but he is uncharacteristically encouraging to Disco when he does so. Disco is eventually able to make the tag, and Dragon immediately brings the hate to his former partner with a flurry of offense, before tagging back in a clearly exhausted Disco for some double team offense. He encourages Disco to stay in the match and win it for his team. This backfires as Steen and Excalibur are able to take back control, but Disco eventually manages to take down Excalibur and has the opportunity to tag Dragon in, but Disco chooses not to, and opts to try and win the match for his team despite the amount of damage he has taken over the course of it. This once again backfires, but Dragon intervenes to break up the pin with a dropkick before calling for the tag from Disco. Disco opts not to make the tag yet again and hits a nasty DDT on Excalibur, but is down. Super Dragon has had enough now. He drags Disco to his corner and tags himself in, but not before hitting a handful of kicks to the side of Disco's head. Dragon is able to immediately hit Excalibur with a curb stomp and wipes out Steen with a rolling elbow, before drilling Excalibur with a psycho driver. Dragon has the match won until Disco breaks up the pin, angry at being mistreated by Dragon and accepting Excalibur's earlier offer to join up with them. Disco hits Dragon with a choke breaker and feeds him to Steen, who hits a pair of package pile drivers to win the match. This is a good match with a really compelling story. We don't get to see much from Super Dragon as he spends the majority of the match on the apron, but his flurries of offense and repeated saves are really solid work. The strategy of Steen and Excalibur to isolate Disco and bait Dragon into interfering so they can cheat behind the referee's back is really excellent tag team stuff. But the MVP of the match has to be Disco. He manages to get the crowd behind him and is really good in his role as babyface in peril. The turn at the end makes sense from a storyline perspective and leaves Dragon seemingly without any allies against the new SBS. The trio would beat down Dragon before El Generico and Human Tornado intervened, setting up an elimination tag match for night 1 of PWG's anniversary show. I don't envy the task of the referee for this match one bit, as there are a lot of very combustible moving parts here with a lot of history with one another. Both teams are able to isolate one member of the opposition for a good length of time in the earlier portions of the match, but these segments regularly break down, with the referee having to show a lot of leniency in order to prevent the match from being a no contest. Much like in the previous match, Steen spends a lot of time goading Dragon and Generico to come in, forcing the ref to turn his back as his team brutalise Human Tornado. Both sides are fairly evenly matched early on, with the only advantage going to the heel team due to their better cohesion and their eagerness to use underhanded tactics. Kevin Steen is the highlight of the match for me. He's an incredibly entertaining wrestler to watch. Even when he isn't a legal man, he's doing lots of great work on the apron, distracting his opponents and taunting them the whole time, especially Dragon, who has some great interactions with in this match. Everyone manages to get in some offense, and there are some great segments where everyone manages to hit some signature moves. When Dragon and Generico are taken out on the outside, Human Tornado is alone in the ring fighting off SBS until a huge powerbomb from Steen, lariat from Excalibur and a choke breaker from Disco get SBS the first elimination. SBS are able to regroup while Generico attempts to revive Dragon. The pair fight valiantly, able to chain together a huge DDT into a curb stomp on Excalibur to try and even the numbers, with Dragon blocking Steen, but the pin is broken up by Disco. SBS are then able to isolate Generico and chain a huge swinging DDT, Fisherman Buster and Tiger Driver 98 to eliminate Generico. With Dragon's partners eliminated, the new SBS patiently wait for their prey to return to the ring. When Super Dragon finally makes his way back in, he is rushed by Disco, before Excalibur is able to hit the Tiger Driver 98, followed by a package pile driver from Steen to get the clean sweep. This match is a pretty fun one. There are some sloppy moments, but that's generally par for the course for a match with so many moving parts. I think conceptually it works well that the two sides are pretty evenly matched. However, when the heels are able to get the first elimination, they maximise their advantage, and they're able to eliminate their other two opponents in fairly short order. Dragon being reluctant to team with Generico and Tornado initially, only for the trio to be a very effective team, is a fun story beat, and I really like the teamwork moments of the ragtag babyface trio, especially the groin-based offense of Dragon and Generico on Steen. The triple dive spot is unbelievable. The way Generico flies to the floor out of nowhere is awesome. The match is probably 5 or 10 minutes too long. I think they spent too much time in the early stages, but as the pace quickened, it's a pretty entertaining match, and the last few minutes are really compelling stuff. The next night, Dragon and Steen would clash in their second ever singles match, with the number one contendership for Styles' PWG title on the line. The two begin the match with some incredibly stiff shots. The action almost immediately spills to the outside, with the two brawling in the crowd, until Dragon is able to counter Steen's Irish whip with a moonsault off the wall. The action briefly returns to the ring, until Steen is able to avoid a charging Dragon, who collides with the ring post and takes a horrific bump to the floor. Steen follows up with a pounding somersault senton from the apron, and then begins to repeatedly hurl Dragon into the wall. Dragon has developed a reputation as a guy who is incredibly stiff and dangerous to his opponents, and there are undoubtedly some infamous moments of that. But I don't think he gets the credit he deserves for how generous he can be with those he faced off with in the ring. He's always struck me as the sort of wrestler where he'll give you what you take from him. If you let him, he'll just beat you down and brutalise you, and you won't get any momentum or show any spotlight whatsoever. However, if you really take the fight to him, he'll make you look unreal, and he'll be willing to take horrific bumps in order to do so. That's one of the reasons I love him as a wrestler so much. The sense that his matches are always pretty close to real danger and real violence. Steen returns Dragon to the ring and continues his onslaught, going right back to Dragon's own leg full Nelson, mockingly making Dragon clap, before Dragon is able to reverse it with a vicious seated surfboard. Steen takes back control, mocking Dragon with the turnbuckle pendulum and standing on his head and neck as he taunts the crowd, and it cannot be understated how good Steen is at getting the crowd against him, constantly arguing with and insulting the fans. Being able to get the crowd invested in him as either a heel or a babyface is Steen's greatest strength, and it is on full display here. Steen remains firmly in control, before hitting a move I don't think I've ever seen before or since. Dragon is perched on the top rope, and a slap from Steen knocks him backwards so he is laying on the ring post. Steen climbs to the top rope and performs a double stomp on Dragon, trying to impale him, in one of the most uniquely brutal spots I've ever seen. It's not enough to get the 3 count, and Steen's attempt at a top rope superplex is countered by Dragon, who lands a huge diving senton for a 2 count. Steen is able to connect with the slingshot flatliner and tries for the senton atomico, but Dragon is able to get his knees up to block it. Dragon then hits another nasty combination from his arsenal. The sit-out buckle bomb transitioned into the STF, but Steen is able to find the ropes and break the hold. Dragon's vicious streak shows no signs of stopping, as he follows up with a slingshot into the ropes and a double stomp to the back of Steen's head. Dragon attempts the elbow suicida, but Steen is able to catch him and throws Dragon and himself into the first row of chairs with a rolling fireman's carry. It's not enough to get the win, and Dragon is able to land a pair of suplexes and 3 nasty stomps before the two begin trading strikes on the mat. Steen makes his way to the top rope for a moonsault, but Dragon cuts him off and nails a lariat, as Excalibur points out on commentary, shades of Stan Hansen and Kenta Kobashi. He nails the diving double foot stomp to the back of the head, but Steen still manages to kick out. Dragon goes to the top rope, but Steen is able to avoid the Sky Twister press before nailing the package pile driver, moonsault and 450 splash to get the win in a phenomenal match. This is a really great match. The crowd is completely invested and the two play off each other incredibly well. Steen plays the young, obnoxious but incredibly talented heel perfectly and works the crowd like a 10-year veteran. And Dragon takes an absolute beating in this one, with some absolutely terrible bumps that serve Steen into making him a viable contender to face AJ Styles. In the main event of the next show, Kevin Steen would face AJ Styles for the PWG title, and would score a massive upset when he would cheat to beat Styles and claim the title. Dragon and Steen would face off once again 2 months later in a non-title match, in the first round of the inaugural Battle of Los Angeles tournament. This match is quite dissimilar from their previous matches, and it is much less of a brawl than their previous encounters, with the first half of the match consisting mostly of very aggressive mat wrestling, with Steen firmly in control. This was a nice change of pace in comparison to their previous matches, as while Steen is known to be a great entertaining brawler, he's great in the role of dominant, disrespectful, pure wrestler. Steen is in phenomenal form in this one, almost fighting members of the crowd multiple times and being an amazingly obnoxious heel. It also put Dragon in the rare position of being the babyface in peril fighting from underneath, which he thrived in much more than I thought he would if I'm being honest. I spoke earlier about how willing Dragon is to take horrific bumps for his opponents, and compared to other matches there isn't too much of that here. What there is in abundance, however, is Steen beating down Dragon and keeping him grounded, unable to really do much damage, leaving Dragon to sell. Towards the end of my Megumi Kudo video, I talked about the humanity and relatability that she brought to deathmatch wrestling, particularly with regards to her facial selling and how that made her an incredibly compelling wrestler to watch. Super Dragon, on the other hand, with his entire face obscured, is unable to use his expression to sell at all, and has to rely purely on his body language. In many of his most well-regarded matches, Dragon is generally the wrestler in control, so you don't get to see many long segments of matches where he has to sell a beatdown, but we get it here, and I find it to be incredibly impressive just how well Dragon puts over Steen's crushing offense. It means all the more when you consider that Dragon is such an archetypical bullying wrestler, with notoriously relentless offense. Having himself for such a long portion of the match, with Steen being so unrelenting, lends so much more credibility to Steen, both as a wrestler generally, but also to his reign as PWG champion, which had started less than a month ago under controversial circumstances. There are of course plenty of the brutal spots we've come to expect from Steen and Dragon, including a crushing somersault senton from the ring to the floor from Steen, a horrific running powerbomb into the wall from Dragon, and the usual array of chops, kicks and stomps to the face and head from both men. After kicking out of the moonsault and 450 splash combination that got Steen the victory in their last singles encounter, and nearly killing Steen with the aforementioned powerbomb, Dragon manages to hit the double stomp to the head and the psycho driver and makes the cover, but Steen somehow has the wherewithal to hook Dragon with the crucifix to win and advance to the second round of Bolo in a very good match. Post-match, in a rare show of respect and sportsmanship, Super Dragon extends a handshake. Steen is reluctant, but ultimately acquiesces and the two shake hands, with Dragon going for a hug too. And for Steen it ends about as well as you'd expect it to. I think this match is a bit of a hidden gem, and it's probably among the most underrated of Super Dragon's career. The two wrestle at a much slower pace, which is a breath of fresh air from the chaotic fights the two had engaged in previously, and the slow build throughout the match made the final stages and bigger spots seem all the more epic as a result. Steen has always been a great small room wrestler. His ability to get the crowd invested as either a heel or babyface is remarkable, and he puts on a masterclass in this match, constantly antagonising the fans with some very colourful language, and mocking Super Dragon with some of his signature moves and taunts. He's spoken before about how fans usually either love him or hate him without any middle ground, and I think that's due in large part to these sorts of antics. In the second round of the tournament, Steen would fall to the man he beat to win the title, AJ Styles, who would go on to be defeated in the finals by Chris Bosh. After successful defences against Bosh, Styles and Samoa Joe, Super Dragon would cost Steen the PWG title at Hanukkah Chaos, the Caesar Silent, by hitting him with back-to-back psycho drivers. Later on in that same show, during Dragon and David Richards' tag team title defense against Excalibur and Disco Machine, Steen would attack Dragon, and even attacked Excalibur and Disco when they tried to intervene. This would lead to a wild pull-apart brawl with most of the PWG locker room making their way ringside to try and separate the two. Steen would make the challenge to put an end to their feud with a guerrilla warfare match at PWG's last show of the year, and Dragon accepted. Almost a year to the day after their first match, Steen and Dragon would end their feud in guerrilla warfare. No countouts, no time limit, and no disqualifications. The match begins immediately with one of the most wild and dangerous crowd brawls I've ever seen, with the pair recklessly throwing and swinging chairs at each other. As Disco Machine and Taro describe it on commentary, it's like the running of the bulls, as the fans try to escape the chaos Steen and Dragon are causing, even climbing onto the apron to avoid their path of destruction. The pair are blasting each other with chairs, throwing each other into chairs and walls, and slamming each other onto the floor. Some really hateful brawling in the opening moments. Steen throws Super Dragon into the ring, but seconds later Dragon flies through the ropes to take out Steen, a member of security and nearly the cameraman too. The brawl continues on the floor, with Dragon even throwing the entrance structure at Steen. Steen eventually does get Dragon into the ring, having obtained the red Super Dragon mask from the merch table. He dons the mask, calling back to the origins of their feud. Steen's attacks as the imposter Super Dragon, and hits Dragon with a particularly vicious curb stomp. Dragon doesn't take kindly to this imitation though, and follows up with two of his own before setting up a table on the outside of the ring. He lays Steen on it, and the crowd drums on the apron as Dragon looks for a huge dive, but Steen is able to roll off the table in time. Dragon responds with a spinning wheel kick off the apron and over the table to the back of Steen's head. Dragon tries for the dive with Steen on the table once again, but Steen is able to catch him in the ropes, and after a bit of back and forth, suplexes Dragon out of the ring and through the table. Steen follows up with a senton atomico, before Dragon takes back control of the diving senton and the slingshot double stomp to the back of Steen's head. When he's rolled back into the ring, Steen retrieves a chair and tries to hit Dragon, who blocks it and gives Steen a nut tap for his trouble, followed by a disgusting chair shot to the back of Steen's head. He places the chair under Steen's head for the curb stomp, then sets it up and forces Steen's head through it, before climbing to the top rope for his trademark double foot stomp. Steen has grown incredibly resilient for his battles with Super Dragon though, and is able to kick out at 2. Dragon leaves the ring and heads to the back to retrieve a metal bucket containing thumbtacks that he pours over the canvas before cracking Steen in the head with it. Like I mentioned earlier, it's the little extra things that Dragon does to make him such a special wrestler, always going the extra mile to hurt his opponents. Dragon looks for the psycho driver into the thumbtacks, but Steen is able to escape and tries to hook the package pile driver. Dragon almost reverses it into a backdrop, but Steen is able to counter and gets Dragon up for a massive powerbomb into the thumbtacks. Steen is too slow to make the cover however, and Dragon kicks out at 2. Steen piles up some steel chairs in the ring and looks for the package pile driver. Dragon is able to escape the first time, but gets caught again and spiked. Once again the damage he's taken thus far slows Steen down, and Dragon once again kicks out, but barely. Steen then leaves the ring and retrieves a barbed wire board, before deciding to avenge the metal bucket shot he took earlier by blasting Dragon in the head with the bucket and the lid. He sets the barbed wire board up between two steel chairs and tries for another powerbomb, but Dragon is able to counter it with a huge lariat. Dragon sets Steen up on the top rope and after a few vicious slaps, lands a huge butterfly superplex into the barbed wire. Steen sells this like death, guttural screams echoing throughout the building, but he refuses to be beaten like that and kicks out at 2. Dragon sets up another table outside the ring, before dragging Steen onto the apron. After some vicious shots to the back of Steen's head, Dragon hooks Steen for the psycho driver and nails it off the apron through a table to the floor in one of my absolute favourite spots. Taking what is essentially a head drop off the apron to the floor is crazy, and both the crowd and the members of the PWG crew checking on both men really sell this as a truly memorable and insane moment. Dragon is the first to recover, and being the vicious monster he is, proceeds to rub Steen's blood all over his face and slap him before rolling him into the ring. Dragon goes for the pin but lifts Steen's shoulders up before the referee can count the 3. He walks backstage again and returns with another bucket, this one containing not thumbtacks but a pair of handcuffs. He cuffs Steen's arms behind his back and drags him to the corner. Steen is completely unable to protect himself and is forced to absorb these brutal chops and forearms before Dragon switches to the knees and koala kicks to the face. Steen is on his knees, defenceless, as Super Dragon retrieves a steel chair and holds it aloft. Steen looks up at Dragon and spits, before Dragon lands one of the most horrific chair shots of all time. Dragon makes the cover, but once again lifts Steen's head off the mat before the 3 count, still not finished with Steen. Dragon drags him to the corner and lifts him onto the top rope, with Steen's arms still handcuffed behind his back. Dragon drapes Steen over his shoulders in the torque track position and walks him to the centre of the ring, delivering one final psycho driver into the thumbtacks, with Steen completely helpless to protect himself. Dragon pins Steen on the barbed wire board to win the match and the feud in absolutely brutal fashion. Wrestlers, security and referee surround Steen as they try to remove the handcuffs and check his condition as the show ends. I know it's not going to be to everyone's taste, but this is one of my favourite matches, and I think it's one of the best independent wrestling matches of all time. The two start the match with incredible intensity, fighting like their lives depend on it. When I talk about the excellent chemistry between the two, this is exactly what I mean. Dragon and Steen bring out a ferocity and vigour in each other, the likes of which I've rarely seen from them in any of their other matches. I believe this comes from Super Dragon's well-documented commitment to wrestling violence, and Kevin Steen's pursuit of Dragon in this regard, to hang with and match him blow for blow, which leads to the two pushing each other and themselves to violent peaks that I don't think they ever really reached again after this feud. When the match finally does make its way into the ring, which I credit to the consistent escalation of violence and the almost constant stream of offense, I spy. There are plenty of callbacks to their previous encounters and incredibly dangerous spots which really make the match feel like a suitable and climactic end to their feud. And Steen, despite being defeated, really doesn't come away from the match any less credible, with Dragon practically killing him in order to get the win. I cannot praise this match enough. For me, it's right up there with Samoa Joe vs Necro Butcher in terms of the greatest and most brutal matches in the history of the American indie scene. When I decided to write a video about this feud, I'm not sure I really understood why I loved it so much. I knew that I loved the matches that Steen and Dragon had, and I knew that the story was well thought out and compelling, but feuds with great matches and great storytelling aren't all that uncommon in wrestling. I think what makes this feud so special is that not only are the matches great and the story compelling, but it also completely and permanently changed both men, and I would even argue this feud is the most pivotal series of matches in either man's career. For Steen to come to PWG, for all intents and purposes the house that Super Dragon built, to start a holy war against the vengeful god of the Southern California independent scene, is a true trial by fire for someone so young. When you're thrust into a feud like that only a few years into your career, it's an amazing opportunity, one that showed the confidence that Dragon had in Steen, but it's very much a step up or get stepped on situation, one that Steen certainly rose to. As Steen himself said in a promo, "I had one goal, it was to become you, to take your spot." This idea was a key part in the early stages of the feud, with Steen dressing as Super Dragon and using Dragon's own offense against him, trying to prove that not only could he be Super Dragon, that he had surpassed him. And while he may have been defeated in the last match of the feud, in a way, he got exactly what he wanted. Over the next few years, as Super Dragon would wind down his career due to a string of unfortunate injuries, Steen's stock on the independent scene would continue to rise. He would reach his highest point on the indies in Ring of Honor in the early 2010s, waging war against Ring of Honor itself and becoming something of a phenom on the independents, developing a status and aura almost akin to what Dragon had in the early to mid 2000s. The feud with Dragon primed Steen to be the successor to Super Dragon, not just within that feud as part of the new SBS, but it gave him the push to fill the spot of the sadistic yet athletic and all-round dangerous fighter on the indie scene, left behind as Dragon wound down his career, a role he continued to have after he left the independent scene and joined WWE. As for Super Dragon, he was already infamous, but this feud with Steen helped solidify his status as one of the most iconic figures of the 2000s independent scene. It takes a very special kind of wrestler to never speak a word and wear a mask that obscures your face entirely and still have a cult-like following years after your career is over. His wrestling style was completely unique, and I honestly don't think anyone's ever replicated it, and I'm not sure anyone ever could. There are plenty of modern wrestlers who wrestle a sort of King's Road Lucharesu hybrid style that Dragon did, but none have ever been able to match the spitefulness of Dragon's offense. He genuinely had the aura of some sort of faceless, vengeful demigod or demon, less of a wrestler and more of an avatar for violence and destruction. The mystique and mythic status of Super Dragon is something that I don't think has ever really been replicated since, especially not on the independent scene. He's one of the most uniquely captivating wrestlers of all time. I think the fact that his full-time career was so short, and that he wrestled exclusively on the independent scene, is one of the key factors behind his mystique. He was never overexposed. In order to really see Super Dragon wrestle, you have to seek him out for yourself. This feud and some of the most brutal moments from it are key artifacts making up the mythology of Super Dragon, and I don't think his legendary status among independent wrestling fans would be so undeniable without this year-long war with Kevin Steen. I highly recommend you seek out and watch as much of this feud as you can. Of the matches that I talked about in this video, my top recommendations would be Kevin Steen and El Generico vs Super Dragon and Excalibur from Cage of Death 6, Super Dragon vs Excalibur from Jason Takes PWG, Kevin Steen vs Super Dragon from the 2nd Anniversary Show, and Kevin Steen vs Super Dragon from Astonishing Xmas. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did and you want to see more like it, be sure to subscribe. For the next episode we'll be heading to Japan in the early 1990s, to discuss the legendary clashes between the Super Generation Army and Saruta Gun, as Mitsuharu Misawa leads his allies into battle with Jumbo Saruta's stable in 3 of the most well-regarded 6-man tag team matches of all time. Follow me on Twitter for updates, and thank you very much for watching. Cheers.